Namaste everybody. Welcome to this video. This is the third in the overall series, An Introduction to Sanatana Dharma, and the second in the sub-series, Books and Prophets. In the earlier video, we discussed a few details of the Vedas, which form the base of Sanatana Dharma. We continue that discussion in this video by talking about two sets of sacred texts, one called the Vedangas and the second called the Puranas. From this video onwards, I am including the references in the description of the video so that anybody who is interested in visiting those sites can copy paste from the description itself. We had discussed earlier that Vedas and Vedic shlokas cannot be translated using a simple Sanskrit dictionary. You may have read certain stories from Hindu literature or even folk tales where you may have read that a certain person had mastered the Vedas and the Vedangas at a very young age. The Vedangas, so people obviously know what are the Vedas or at least have heard about them. The Vedangas, now what are the Vedangas? Anga is basically an organ, we can say an organ. So the Vedangas are basically 6 organs of the Vedas, without knowing which one should not attempt a translation of a Vedic shloka. Now, what are these Vedangas? The first is something called Siksha. Siksha does not mean punishment, but it means more of training or coaching. In the earlier video, we discussed 6 aspects of sound, swara, varna, things like that. The Siksha portion of the Vedanga actually talks or deals with certain aspects related to these parameters, these 6 parameters that were discussed earlier. The second Vedanga is something called Chandas. Chandas basically refers to poetic meter. In an overall way, Chandas can actually mean the Vedic shloka or the Vedas as a whole. That is the reason Gayatri, the deity, is also referred to as Chandomata or Vedamata. However, as a Vedanga, Chandas basically means poetic meter. There are multiple meters that are available. Anushtup is very popular. Trishtup, Gayatri is also the name of a meter, so on and so forth. These basically define, for example, how many alphabets should be in a particular shloka and aspects related to poetic meter in general. The third is Vyakarana. Vyakarana is actual grammar. This basically deals with samasas, sandhis that all of us are familiar with. Are we really familiar with this? Obviously, there are many things that we do not know. However, the third Vedanga is basically Vyakarana or grammar. Fourth, basically talks about Nirukta. Nirukta, the term basically means etymology. I'll give you a small example. This may or may not be there in Nirukta. However, this is just an example. By the way, when we talk about Vyakarana, one of the most famous personalities, or in fact, the most famous personality, whenever we who comes to mind when we think of Vyakarana is Panini. In fact, even in the Western world, Panini is considered to be the father of linguistics. Now, with Nirukta, the person whose name comes to mind is a gentleman named Yaska. He is very strongly associated with Nirukta. Now, let me give you that example I was talking about. The word guru, for example, gu indicates darkness or ignorance. Ru indicates one who dispels this. That way, guru can mean the dispeller of darkness or ignorance. This is an example of etymology. The Nirukta talks about etymology of certain words. Then we come to Jyotisha, which basically talks about time and celestial objects. What are auspicious times, what are not, when is a good time to perform a yajna, for example. All of these come under Jyotish. Jyotish is not just fortune telling. Unfortunately, today that might be the understanding that a lot of people have. However, Jyotish is a much wider subject that deals with time in a general sense. And then we also have a Vedanga called Kalpa. If you have paid close attention to certain stories that are narrated during your vratas or vrats, Satyanarayana Vrata, Ganesh Chaturthi, you will hear a phrase, or in fact, whenever you hear the description of what is to be done during this vratas, right? There's a phrase used, Kalpokta Prakarena, Kalpa Ukta Prakarena. What that means is in accordance with what has been said in the Kalpa. That way, the Kalpa deals with certain ritualistic aspects that are beneficial to human life. So these 6 constitute the Vedangas. Now, let's go ahead. Earlier, when we were talking about the Vedas, we had this concept of Shruti because the student learns it by hearing from the teacher. It is passed on orally and by hearing. That is the reason the Vedas are called Shrutis. Now, the Puranas, Itihasas, these can be referred to collectively as something called Smriti. Smriti is something which can mean that which is remembered, okay, that which is in memory. Another phrase that is used to describe these is a phrase called Jaya. Now, there is a book available on the market by a person who calls himself a mythologist called Jaya, which is the Mahabharata from his point of view. However, Jaya means not only the Mahabharata, it can actually be applied to the Puranas and to the epics. Now, why do we have this phrase called Jaya? Jaya obviously means victory. What victory? When is a man, human being, said to be victorious? Human life, according to Hinduism, has 4 objectives, which I will deal in a separate video. However, very briefly, dharma, righteousness or the duty that we have to perform, artha, wealth, kama, any form of desire, moksha, which is radically different from heaven or hell or the Abrahamic concept of salvation and judgment day, has nothing to do with those. It's completely different. But these are the 4 objectives of human life. A person who has achieved all 4, in fact, even if a person has achieved the last one, is said to have attained Jaya or victory. Therefore, Hindu literature, when we refer to it as Jaya, basically tries to give a man victory in life. That is the reason why this is called Jaya. Now, there is a shloka that is recited by people who give discourses on the Puranas and the epics. It goes like this: Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayamudirayat. Basically, the person is saluting a couple of people before he or she embarks on that discourse. Who are these beings? There were 2 rishis, Nara and Narayana. Obviously, they came from the ultimate Narayana or Parabrahma. So the person is starting off by saluting Nara and Narayana, who were reborn respectively as Arjuna and Krishna, by the way. So he has begun by saluting them, Nara and Narayana. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam. Narottama is basically Purushottama or the ultimate God, Parabrahma. Devim Saraswatim, the divine Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom, knowledge, learning. Vyasam. Obviously, he is the one who has authored all the Hindu texts that we are talking about. Therefore, he is saluting Vyasa also. Tato Jayam Udirayat. Now I embark upon the narration of Jaya. So the idea behind Hindu literature is to give a man all 4 ideals in life, or help a man to achieve all 4 objectives, not just spiritual wealth, but also actual material wealth. That is the whole idea behind these texts, all Hindu texts for that matter. Let us now talk about the Puranas. Now, the Vedas, as we discussed earlier, have shlokas that were visualized by drashtas. Now, let me give you an example. Imagine there are 2 physicists who talk to each other, who have met. They can actually communicate with each other using mathematical equations. That is sufficient for them to understand each other. Now, imagine I go to that physicist and say, please explain this mathematical equation to me. I'm obviously not trained in that mathematics. So the mathematician has to embark on a lengthy explanation for my benefit. The Hindu literature, apart from the Vedas, does something similar. The Vedic shlokas were visualized by mantra drashtas in an exalted state of consciousness. Normal people like us cannot understand very clearly what is being said there. They're very brief. So the Puranas, the Itihasas, epics, all these take upon themselves the responsibility to disseminate the Vedic knowledge in a much easier way, or a method that can, in a way that can be understood in a very easy way. So it is a misconception that Vedic knowledge was restricted to a select few. No. As we discussed earlier, the training needed to attain a certain level of mastery, to pass on the Vedas, is extremely tough, is extremely high. There's a lot of effort that is involved. For this reason, a certain class or a certain section of the society, so to say, was given that responsibility. However, the knowledge itself was never restricted, is not restricted, will not be restricted. The Puranas are part of Hindu literature that have taken this responsibility to disseminate this Vedic knowledge to everybody. Now, they are primarily 18 in number. There are also some Puranas called the Upapuranas, or they are not minor, so to say. However, the most significant ones are 18 in number, or the most popular ones are 18 in number, and they are attributed to the sage Vedavyasa. He is said to have, whatever way you wish to say it, recorded them, compiled them, written them. The authorship, so to say, is assigned to Vedavyasa. Now, what are the characteristics of these Puranas? Puranas deal with various topics. For example, just to give you a small example, in the Bhagavad Purana, that's not the objective obviously, but there is description of how an embryo develops over a period of time, how the fetus, the direction of the fetus changes. These descriptions are available. Then the Garuda Purana talks about a lot of, or rather talks about kinds of hells. For those of you who might have seen the movie Onion or Aparachitudu or Aparachit, those descriptions of hells, Kumbhi Pakam, all these, right, have probably been taken verbatim from the Garuda Purana. By the way, it is a misconception that we should not have the Garuda Purana at home. It is true that when a person passes away, certain sections of the Garuda Purana are to be recited at home. However, the Garuda Purana, being part of the overall corpus of the Puranas, is a divine text, and there is no restriction against keeping a copy of the Garuda Purana at home. Now, going back to the earlier point, the Puranas this way talk about multiple things. However, all the Puranas are said to have at least 5 basic characteristics. So there is a shloka for this. It goes like this: Sargascha Pratisargascha Vamsho Manvantaranicha Vamshanucharitam Chaiva Puranam Panchalakshanam. Basically, Sarga talks about the origin of everything, the ultimate creation. How did that come about, right? I think it's called cosmogony, if I'm not mistaken. Then there is Pratisarga. Okay, once the initial creation came about, how did the rest of the creation come about? Sargascha, Pratisargascha, Vamsho, Vamshaha, family, rishis, deities, kings, their families. Manvantara. Now, I will deal with the Hindu concept of time in a separate video. It needs a separate video. However, a Manvantara is basically a very large unit of time. So the Purana, the time scale that a Purana deals with is literally on the scale of a Manvantara or maybe more, not a few years. It's a huge unit of time. Let me just say that much here. Lastly, Vamshanucharitam, basically various stories about the families. So all these 5 talk about creation, rest of the creation or reproduction, then family trees, genealogies, who were the kings, what was the line of descent, all of these. Then all of these topics are actually covered over a huge period of time. So these are the basic characteristics of what is called the Purana. And the Purana, as I said, is not a single text. There are 18 main Puranas and a lot of other Upapuranas. In the next video, I will touch upon the Itihasas, starting with the well-known Ramayana. I wish all of you all the very best in your personal endeavor to attain Jaya. Thank you for watching the video.